ensure that our culture, society, economy, and our very own way of life will flourish in the 21st century. We should never forget this goal.
All of the areas north of the 60th parallel will finally receive a just settlement of issues and grievances and a recognition of rights that have been unresolved for as long as Canada has existed.
I'm pleased to say that we have concluded our negotiations on all major issues. The final agreement, which hopefully will be ratified sometime mid-year in 1992, paves the way for the finalization of TFN's land claim and the beginning of a new partnership between the Inuit of the Eastern Northwest Territories and the people of Canada.
For the Inuit people of Canada's Eastern Arctic, that announcement by Tom Sidden marks the beginning of the final phase of a political process that has been evolving since the Diefenbaker era. This year, residents of the Northwest Territories will vote on the proposed boundary of a vast new territory. If they endorse it, the map of Canada will be redrawn for the first time since Newfoundland joined Confederation to accommodate the creation of the new territory of Nunavut. For the Inuit, who have never signed a treaty with Canada, it will at last be settlement of their claim to a land they have occupied for thousands of years. For Canadians, it will mean a constitutional partnership with Inuit for environmental management and economic development of 1/5 of the land area of Canada.
I think people must understand that the Inuit are very consistent. They don't change their mind easily. And I think that's what's kept us going.
Like the Yukon Territories, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and parts of northern Quebec and Ontario, Nunavut will be carved out of the Northwest Territories. The proposed boundary follows the 60th parallel from the Saskatchewan and Manitoba border, then to the eastern reaches of Hudson's Bay, north following the Territorial Sea to Ellesmere Island, across the top of Canada, and south to Victoria Island, and then follows a line just west of Coppermine to the 60th parallel. In total, 2 million square kilometers, 1/5 of Canada's landmass, 2/3 of our coastline. Political development in the north is going hand in hand with the resolution of Inuit land claims. Jack Stagg is the federal official in charge of political development in the north.
What we hear from the Inuit of the Eastern Arctic is that they believe that their, at least short-term, if not longer-term, interests in greater self-determination will be satisfied through the establishment of Nunavut, which will be a public government, somewhat like the territorial governments we already have established now in both Yukon and the larger N.W.T.
Yet, by sheer force of numbers, making up more than 80% of the population, the Inuit will control the political agenda in the new Nunavut.
In reality, because of our majority, we are practicing self-government. So I think people have to understand that we have not given up our right to self-government, and that that Nunavut, to us, is self-government, and it's going to happen even without an agreement on amendment to the Constitution on self-government.
What complicated 15 years of negotiations was the insistence by the Inuit leadership that their Aboriginal claims could not be resolved without the creation of the new territory, which defined the settlement area. So, in effect, there were two sets of negotiations, at times proceeding on a parallel course, and at others interlocking. Thomas Sulik, a former member of Parliament for the Eastern Arctic, has been a principal advisor and negotiator for the Tunngavik Federation of Nunavut.
The difference between Inuit negotiators, I suppose, and others is that we like to get right down to the point. we state this is our goal, and this is our other goal, and we just state it very matter-of-factly right from the start. This is where we intend to go. This is what we intend to do. It could take a year, it could take 10 years, or our lifetimes, but that is what we have decided we will go.
And on the other side of the table, opposite the Inuit negotiators, Tom Malloy, the chief government negotiator.
In some issues, they were very emotional, issues dealing with lands and hunting rights and some other issues. They were issues that were emotionally important to Inuit people, and that would affect the way in which they approached them.
It was a great opportunity to go all the way. Okay, well, you did this to us, now watch us do it to you. See, this is what you thought of us, this is what we think of you.
There were times when we weren't negotiating because we had reached an insolvable impasse. So yes, there were times during the course of the years, although it was more, I would say, in the earlier days than later. But even in later times, there were periods where I wondered whether or not it was doable.
This is the moment that we have been waiting for.
But it was doable. On April 30th, 1990, in the village of Igloolik, an agreement in principle was signed by Indian Affairs and Northern Development Minister Tom Sidden, Paul Kwasa, former president of the Tungavik Federation, and Dennis Patterson, former leader of the territorial government.
Congratulations. Now we make it work.
Then, one by one, the Inuit leaders and the members of the territorial government representing the Eastern Arctic added their signatures.
In my short lifetime, I have come from virtually traditional camp with no outside influence up to this day. I'm able to be a minister and able to talk in your language, communicating to you and also to the Canadians on the importance of what we want as Inuit. We are very much tied to the land. If the land is so important to us because it allowed us to survive. If we didn't have the land or resources, we would not be here today.
And finally, adding his signature to the agreement, Tom Malloy, the government negotiator who at times had wondered if it was doable.
I see it as a group effort, not only of people that I worked with in government, but also with respect to the Inuit people as well. So I see it as an accomplishment shared by many of us.
20 months after the Igloolik ceremonies, the negotiators concluded the final agreement. To many Southerners, the Canadian Arctic is a cold, harsh expanse that generates both a sense of fear and curiosity. The Inuit, who have survived here for thousands of years, see it as much more than that. For them, this barren and usually snow-covered expanse is a source of life, their spiritual foundation. From this land, they take their food, their clothing, and their culture. In return, they give their love and respect. The Inuit were part of the migration across the Bering Sea when Russia and Alaska were connected by a land bridge. That was thousands of years ago. They fanned out across what is now Alaska, Canada, and Greenland. Their first contact with the European world dates back to the early Norse explorers. In later centuries, the British explorers sailed through northern waters, charting the Arctic coastline and searching for the Northwest Passage. One of the most famous explorers was John Franklin. all hands were lost during his second expedition in 1845. Near the cairn that commemorates the exploits of Franklin and his men are the graves of the sailors who died on one of the search missions. By the time Canadian explorer George Mackenzie sailed into the Arctic, the Inuit, or Eskimos as they were called, were becoming familiar with the people and the ways of Southern society. This 1920s expedition produced one of the first films ever taken in the Arctic. It gave Canadians a glimpse of a land they had only read about, and a rather whimsical introduction to the Inuit people. The land the Inuit thought was theirs was granted by Charles II of England by charter to what became the Hudson's Bay Company. 3 years after Confederation, Canada acquired from the Bay what came to be known as the Northwest Territories. Its early capital was Regina. The missionaries were the next to establish a permanent presence in the North. They brought their religion, education, and rudimentary health care. In the early part of this century, the Northwest Mounted Police set up their first Arctic posts. Massive government involvement began in the late 1950s and early 60s, when the first public housing projects were built by Health and Welfare. Then, family allowance was introduced. In order to qualify for family allowance, the Inuit had to send their children to school. So families began leaving the land and moving into the new communities. The introduction of snowmobiles gave hunters greater range, but they too developed a reliance on the new centers for their parts and fuel. In 30 years, the Inuit moved from the land to the space age.
Quit now.
It is the young who are caught in the middle of two clashing cultures. They try to adjust to change and prepare for the future, yet many are reluctant to let go of their past.
Some people want to hang on to how it was, and some people would just want to go forward and see how it could be.
Times are changing so fast, you can't really adjust to getting the best of both worlds. It's, I don't know, quite hard. I don't know how it is for the rest of the students, but for myself personally, I don't know, I just like to stop whatever I'm doing, just sit down and, I don't know, just go back and maybe go out hunting with my father just to get that chance again.
I myself feel that we're badly losing our culture. Like, people these days don't go out hunting as much or do traditional stuff as much.
We're going through a change in cultures, and there's a lot of young people who are, you know, can't find one culture from the other, and they just don't know where they are. But then there are others who can, you know, just go along with it.
The challenge facing the Inuit leadership is to protect and honor the past while at the same time controlling their destiny, their social and economic development.
Tusang nalaw tikuldo o kausa katatak emailing ayo tay kani angeron atulekpan piyon nang mig at piyon nang tago maachi taman ukperillugo o kausa katataka nutakkanullo ila tamay nyo inung.
Nunavut will give the Inuit political control, but the real guarantees are in the terms of the land claims settlement, the biggest ever negotiated by an Aboriginal group and the federal government.
The history books of the next century will record this as a turning point in the history of our relationship with all of the Aboriginal peoples of Canada, constitutionally, economically, socially, and ultimately it comes down to empowerment and capturing that ability on the part of Aboriginal people to be what they want to be.
The Land Claim Agreement is a modern treaty. It is an exchange between the Inuit and Canada that will replace partially undefined Aboriginal rights in lands with defined rights that are constitutionally protected. The Inuit will have title to 350,000 square kilometers, approximately 20% of the new territory of Nunavut, making them the biggest landowners in Canada. Access to land and water for hunting and fishing is guaranteed. The Inuit will receive over $1 billion from the government, with payments spread over a 14-year period. They will also receive another $13 million in training funds. The settlement also gives the Inuit mineral rights to 36,000 square kilometers in the claim area and a share of government royalties. Equal representation on boards with responsibility for land use planning, wildlife management, environmental and socio-economic reviews of development proposals, and water management. In return, the Inuit will surrender their Aboriginal claims to lands and waters, providing a climate of certainty for economic development in this vast part of Canada. Just over a decade ago, the Inuit of Baker Lake took government and industry to court to stop mineral exploration from interfering with their Aboriginal rights. Now, with the Land Claims Agreement, the Inuit will be major players in future resource development. There are proven oil and gas reserves in the Arctic, and the Inuit will have title to some potentially rich mineral areas. The mining industry, already an economic factor in the North, has been watching political developments very carefully.
We feel we can work with the Inuit people. There will be a period of shakedown. We're going to want to make sure that that everybody understands the rules and the implications of the rules, and we're quite prepared to work with them. In fact, we have a working group with the TFN right now to try to design the fine structure of those rules so that they don't lead to unexpected consequences.
There is a new corporate elite developing in the North, businessmen ready to talk joint ventures.
Some businesses got a little paranoid, thinking that we were going to take over everything over here. We had to sit down with them and say, look, we're a business much like you guys. We'd like to make money. One interest we have is that this is our land, this is our home.
Ariak heads up an Inuit-funded development corporation with $7 million in real estate assets.
There are some of us up here now who are ready to take on some exciting ventures. There have been some of us who've begun some projects that are mildly interesting, and hopefully we can offer some creative ways of making money, but also helping in the growth of our northern economy.
The claim settlement and the creation of Nunavut will have an enormous impact on the lives of the people in the Eastern Arctic. It's therefore not surprising that many Inuit do not fully understand the terms of the settlement. And there's also some concern over what was given up to get that agreement.
I don't really understand Nunavut that much. Like, I don't know what it's about. Like, are we going to be like the Indians with our rights taken away and we get a piece of land, or what?
The people haven't been really informed about it as well. It's just been the leaders. And then also you have to question the leadership of the people. Like, do we have the right leaders to guide us through this? Are they going to stick with it? And do they know what they're doing? You know, you kind of have to question this kind of stuff.
What are we giving up? What are we giving up in order to, like, what are we giving up in order to gain something else? What is that thing we're giving up?
And again, she lost her turn. She was not very good at hide and seek.
Michael Kusagak also has some concerns. He writes children's books, stories based on his childhood and Inuit folklore.
I like the idea of Nunavut. I mean, you know, I think it's something that we should really strive for. But there's some problems I have. I mean, the Nunavut, the way it is, you know, in the agreement, seems like a bunch of pockets of bits of land that the Inuit are keeping for themselves, and the rest they're selling to the government at, I don't know. That's one problem I have. As they stepped into the water to skip across, the fish jumped and water splashed everywhere. It needs to be explained to the people. I think there are so many people who really do not understand what is going on.
The Inuit leaders have been responding to those questions at community meetings. A summit meeting in the village of Iqaluit opens with the traditional lighting of the kudluk, the vessel the ancestors of these people used to heat their igloos and cook their food. One by one, the leaders of the Inuit organizations pledge their continued support.
We now have to take account of our current situation and strengthen our unity. We have to have clear vision of our path for the future.
Their people will vote to decide on the claims agreement. Of broader concern is the plebiscite, in which all territorial residents will vote on the proposed boundary of Nunavut.
There are many people now that will be already thinking of what is the outcome of the people's deliberations on the plebiscite. So we must all make sure that if we're really wanting to accomplish the goal of a Nunavut government, that each and every one of us are committed to bring the message to everyone in the Northwest Territories, whoever they may be.
I think that what is seen as some concern or even opposition in the West will probably translate into a lower turnout. There'll be people who won't have the heart to vote against what they see as aspirations for self-determination for the people of the East. And I think rather than voting no, they'll end up staying home. So I think we're going to win.
And for a people who have been here for so many thousands of years and who have come so far in a single generation, there is no alternative to Nunavut.
Tamanna tevanna timi ukauti simayakka. Tamanna nunatang ingat kasing nito akalokpan. Siwun acceptini okuma ituarung mikpilari baldia yung nang niyakata. Apso kay manunatini isumaliyo kataw yung nanginyata ublumi. Ang itaw si mangini upidyo tigillugo. Taikan ni nunawok tao ta ang itaw si manat ingat kalakpan. Kisiya ni tamanna isumaliyo kung nang nibun. Ingat kakataw yung naksitiang niyaman. Tamatuming kuning ujuk nalungitak isumaliyo kung naksiniang matat kisiya ni taikan.